they have a lot of hopes, and they thought last year they were turning the corner. Even early this year, they start turning the corner, and then you lose 13 games in a row.
Edmonton chipped away, got a late goal, won the game 4-3. I felt like they dominated the third period. They moved the puck on that power play. It was an exceptional hockey game. It went over the total.
Only on SportsGrid.
This guy Ovechkin, how he was injured and missed all that time, and the fact that he's still on pace to pass Gretzky.
I think everybody's rooting for Ovechkin at this point in time, and I think he'll do it as well. So it's a feat that ever thought Scotty would be broken. It's going to be broken, and it's probably going to be broken because he's not going to stop shooting.
Pharrell, coast to coast, only on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take. Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Road management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results. What? How do you do this one? Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
One hour down, hour two on deck, hour three after that. It's what we do. It's a Tuesday morning. We're getting you ready. It's cold in most of the country, but the heat is on with the SportsGrid Network. So, Joe, temperature vibes in the room. We talked a little college football. We talked a little NBA action. We got NFL topics, which include the AFC and NFC championship games and some of those lines moving forward. The head coaching cycle starting to turn now. How we doing this morning? We hanging in there? We feeling good after an hour? Do you want to host hour number two? Just let me know.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. No, we're good, Donnie. It's all you, my man. I'm just glad to be a part of it here. I know Ben did a great job last night, so being able to sit in his chair, it's an honor of epic proportions here this morning, Donnie.
Sitting in the chair being the absolute topic of conversation last night around the SportsGrid Network. But we'll get to that later. Maybe we can do that. But in the NFL, I'm telling you right now, Joe, you said, well, Donnie, you're hosting this morning. What actually happened? Well, I had a Skype interview yesterday with the Chicago Bears, just like millions of Americans to try to get the head coaching job for the Bears. They settled on a head coach. And I got to tell you, he's the prize out there right now, and it's Ben Johnson going to the Chicago Bears after having a successful run as offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. And we'll start there first. Let me ask you this question. We know that Ben Johnson was the hot hire coming into this cycle. He could probably pick the team that he wanted. He ends up with the Chicago Bears. But during this whole process, did you feel like he was the front runner in Chicago? Because they really cast that wide net and talked to old coaches, young coaches, coaches that were ready to be head coaches, coaches that weren't ready to be head coaches here. Did you think they settled on the correct guy for them? And also, did you agree with interviewing like 50 people, it felt like?
Well, listen, I'd rather you leave no stone unturned and get it right this time as opposed to continuing down the same path that you've done year after year and continue to make the wrong decisions. You've got more talent and actually cap space on this team than anybody else. There is literally no excuse for you not to get the right guy in the building to help your number one pick in Caleb Williams, eventually become, and it's kind of crazy, right? Because you got a lot on the line now, Chicago, because the guy you passed up on in order to take Caleb Williams is playing in the NFC Championship game, and he's leading his team. So you better get this next hire right for a litany of reasons. But I think it was down to him and McCarthy. And the big question was, and I would have been okay with McCarthy too, taking a young quarterback and giving him a guy that has a history of working with quarterbacks there, some pretty good ones too. I'd have been all right with that pick, but I also think the ability to be able to take your OC from your division rival, I think they nailed it. They got the guy they want. We'll see if it works out, but certainly I think given the choice, they probably made the right one, at least in the short term. Lots still to be determined in the long term on whether they got this hire right.
You're right about that, Joe, because you wake up this morning as a Chicago Bears fan. I don't think anybody's going to oh, man, come on. We wanted McCarthy over Ben Johnson. This was the prize here. This is going to get your fan base excited. Mm-hmm. But I always like to go back to, how did we actually get to this place? And sometimes you can say, you know what, if you listen to the fans, you end up sitting with the fans as a front office guy or head coach. You've heard that throughout the years. But I got to tell you, a lot of times I think the fans know way more and don't overestimate what the actual options are. Because last year, Joe, did anybody who was a Bears fan or around the NFL and league circles or even fans of other teams go, you know what? The right move is bringing Matt Eberflus back to hone this offense here and this young football team. We didn't think that was possible. And they said, you know what? We're going to bring in Shane Waldron here as the offensive coordinator to be the curator for Caleb Williams coming into the NFL. And it was a disaster that it felt like we all saw this coming. Forget about watching Hard Knocks and getting behind the scenes. Nobody said, oh, wow, Eberflus coming back. And particularly when last year, maybe the hottest job once again in the coaching market was the Bears. They didn't even call guys like Jim Harbaugh. They're like, you know what? No good for us. Eberflus is better. So going from Eberflus and making the mistake there to bring him back, I think they corrected that mistake. And I like the fact that Caleb Williams, obviously the offense needs to get going. There's talent at running back. There's talent at wide receiver. As you said, Joe, there's a ton of cap space. This was a job and a destination that you should want to go to. And I think they got the best of it.
Yeah, I think they did too. But, I am not a big fan of keeping the general manager that hired or made the decision to keep Eberflus in the building. I'm not a big fan of thinking somehow or another they got it wrong. Unless he was told to keep Eberflus, I don't know why we have him and still Ryan Poles still as the GM in Chicago. Oh, and by the way, I have no idea what they're doing in Jacksonville with Trent Baalke as well. So I think if you're going to clean house and fire a guy mid-season and you're the guy that hired him or decided to keep him, what are we doing here? If you're going to clean house, you need to clean house. You need to get fresh eyes in there and somebody that can hire their own head coach and the own system that they know. And unfortunately, I do not understand what some of these owners do here when they keep one and not the other is beyond me.
I'll tell you, in professional sports and particularly, Joe, the NFL, it's one of the few marketplaces where broadcast business, sports business, owning a hardware store on the corner, a pizza shop, where if you don't provide a good product on the field, you lose money and you go out of business. No matter what happens to the Chicago Bears, they could go 0-17 the next decade. They will still be sold out in Chicago. They will make a ton of money, and they'll have 50 people trying to buy that team for billions more than it's actually worth. So there is no pressure of, you're getting relegated, like let's just say in the EPO. It's like, hey, man, if we don't perform, we got to spend some money. No, you do whatever you want at this spot. I just think for Bears fans here who deserve so much better than they've gotten over the past 25 to 30 years since their last Super Bowl victory in 1985, 1986, that this finally could work out. But let's also take a look at the ramifications, because we'll get the Detroit side of it here. But Chicago moving forward, Detroit's still going to be a good football team. Minnesota certainly looks like they're still going to be a good football team, depending on which quarterback they go with. Will it be J.J. McCarthy? The Green Bay Packers are a very good organization, still there. What are the expectations for you for first-year coach Ben Johnson and the Chicago Bears next year?
Well, I think the top priority, Donnie, is that you better make Caleb Williams as good as Kingsbury has made Jaden Daniels, because that's what you're always going to be compared to, period. That's it. Number one and number two. You passed up on the guy that's in the NFC Championship game right now, and you instead went for Caleb Williams, but didn't give him the same OC. Now you've adjusted that, and you apparently have, at 38 years old, the next hot coordinator, head coach. And by the way, they don't always work out, Donnie. So again, you got to have some patience, but I think that we need to see that progression from Caleb Williams next season with Ben Johnson. We need to see this offense show up and show out. We need to see the offensive line protect him. That's all on Ben Johnson. Everything else, as far as I'm concerned, he gets himself a good defensive coordinator, a good special teams guy, and the next couple of hires are extremely important for the Bears here moving forward.
Yeah, this isn't Sam Darnold, right, Joe? It's not a reclamation project.
Right.
This was a kid that people and organizations were tanking and hoping they had a chance to get Caleb Williams.
Correct.
This is also a football team that has a lot of money to spend and already some key components in the building. So if we're looking at, look what I did with Jared Goff in this offense, now I have more arm strength and talent in Caleb Williams and a much more mobile and athletic quarterback. Let's see what happens. But I understand people out there are going to knock it and say, well, Ben Johnson needs a guy that stays in the pocket and delivers on time. Caleb Williams is much more explosive. But if you're trusting Ben Johnson to turn an offense like Detroit into a powerhouse with Jared Goff, those same expectations absolutely should be there for the Chicago Bears. And as Joe pointed out, we're expecting things to turn around quickly here. This is not, 4-13 next year. I'm just getting my feet wet. You are expecting to perform next year. Let's talk about the opposite side, the Detroit Lions next, and where they sit.
They have a lot of hopes, and they thought last year they were turning the corner. Even early this year, they start turning the corner, and then you lose 13 games in a row.
Edmonton chipped away, got a late goal, won the game 4-3. I felt like they dominated the third period. They moved the puck on that power play. It was an exceptional hockey game. It went over the total.
Only on SportsGrid.
The two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results. What? How do you do this one? Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Super Bowls are hard to win. Super Bowls are hard to get to. We understand the heartbreak of an NFL season that might end in just one game. And we saw that with the Detroit Lions show, where you think you're the number one seed, which you are. You think you're going to play like the number one seed, which you didn't. You didn't even get to the NFC Championship game. You got out-muscled in your own building, and the season ends abruptly, which means players are going to change. Players are going to get older. Also, coaching staffs are not going to be the same. And that certainly now is an effect for the Detroit Lions. But the one thing that we do always talk about is how long can those Super Bowl windows actually last? And for Detroit, Dan Campbell, we got a clip here, and he's going to try to explain that.
Yeah, I do, man. I think that's, we talk about that core group is still intact, and some of these guys are now, we've signed some back, some are up on contracts, and that'll be ongoing. But yeah, we absolutely do, and I think the most important thing is you want to know you got your culture, you got your identity, and you got players and that fit into that, and we've got that. Like we got players in every pivotal position you can ask for to have success. And those guys are made the right way. So absolutely our window is open.
There you go. You wouldn't expect anything less from Dan Campbell. Say, man, window's shut and looking for my next job at this point. There's a lot of talent still in that room, but the credit goes to Dan Campbell for being the head coach. Yes, he cultivated that culture that turns out, you know what? We could have a pretty good foundation for a franchise that hasn't seen a lot of success over the past 50 years or so. But a lot of that success also, Joe, went to Ben Johnson, the creative offensive coordinator that's now not going to be in that building. And also, there is a defensive coordinator we'll get to who's probably leaving as well. Talk to me about your thought process now with Detroit moving forward, at least without Ben Johnson today.
Well, the problem is we're going to learn rather quickly whether or not Ben Johnson was responsible for the resurgence of Jared Goff, or if Jared Goff is, played a big role in helping him to execute that offense. I think that's still to be determined here. But I can tell you this, they are, and I agree with Dan Campbell, they have the things that matter most for a organization to have success long-term are the things he talked about. You have an identity. You have the players. You have a culture in place. We have seen that work. Consistency works. So now what we've got to see from Dan Campbell in this front office is the ability to replace the Ben Johnsons or, the defensive coordinator if he leaves. You've got to be able to plug and play those guys. Baltimore's done it. Harbaugh's done it for years, and it seems to work, and they still find themselves in the playoffs. So that's the next step here for Dan Campbell in Detroit, is that if these coordinators were that good that it was all about them, well, then you better make sure their replacements are every bit as good here and can motivate these guys. So I think the hiring of the replacements is that next step to figure out whether Dan Campbell and Detroit and that window is still open.
No, you're right about that, because the framework of that football team is still going to be there. But as we know in the NFL, it's not like any other league. Like, injuries are going to happen. Attrition is going to happen.
Yep.
And yes, they had a lot of attrition and injuries on defense, which you can't make up for. Not an excuse, but they did have it. But that offense for most of the year was completely intact and humming along as Ben Johnson. They scored more points than anybody else in the NFL. And if you're looking at some of those statistics coming into the year, we expected a good team. 10.5 win total. They wound up with 15 wins. Best record in the NFL, 10-1 price. Nailed that as well. NFC title was a 5-1 price. They didn't win that. And obviously the Super Bowl at 12-1, they didn't. But the expectations, and you saw like the raw emotion for Dan Campbell after that game ended against the Commanders, whereas he never thought, and neither did the fan base, and rightfully so, that was going to be a loss on that night. They didn't think it would be that explosive where it's like, wow, how did this go wrong? Open up the game with a touchdown lead. Next thing you know, a 5-turnover struggle for our offense. We don't force any turnovers and get beat by double digits. We understand things are going to change in the NFL and how it goes down, but that's as devastating a loss as you're going to have. And also, it's not as if it's like, hey, man, we're like the Kansas City Chiefs. The past decade, we got the 6 of these things. Didn't work out in our favor tonight. Won 2 Super Bowls in the past. We'll get it back together. This was a team and a city starving for anything, that they were getting great football all season long and figured, you know what? If we don't win the Super Bowl, it looks like at least we're going to get there with home field advantage. And to not even make the NFC title game, that's as devastating as it gets.
Yeah, it is. And it's unfortunate the way it is. But they overcame a ton of injuries on the defensive side. But ultimately, when it mattered the most against the better competition, that was, styles make fights. And not having the best or one of the best top 3 defensive players in the league who somehow or another didn't play a snap because he got hurt from week 5 on and still led the team in sacks. It's very hard to overcome that and expect to win a championship. And I think they've got to get him back in there and get a couple of other guys signed and restock. I think they'll be just fine in that division because I do think ultimately that team, as long as it continues to have to go through Detroit, I think they're going to have a chance to at least play for a Super Bowl here. They have all the pieces they need. They just got to fine tune it, right? Make the next hire, get the new guys in there, and put it together and start again next year. There is no reason with the talent they have on both sides of that ball that they should not be competing for an NFC championship over the next couple of years.
Let me ask you this question quickly, too, because we understand the whole grit mentality around Detroit, and they like to, bring their sort of set of pain and set of rules themselves. Are they going outside the building for the offensive coordinator? Because the Philadelphia Eagles tried that with Brian Johnson, didn't work at all. They go outside the building with Kellen Moore, it worked. Are they staying in-house for this OC, or are they going out-of-house?
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting part. And how many guys do we really trust in order to go? Listen, if Jared Goff is comfortable with what's in the building and you have enough faith, by all means. But again, we're talking about Ben Johnson was 38 years old. So who's the guy behind him? Who is the guy in building that you're going to trust? I think you have to go outside at this point.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, because if you do go outside, that's not a job that, they were too good last year on offense. That's a lot of weapons you would want to certainly coach and see what happens. Talking about coaching searches, we still got 5 teams out there looking for a coach. Let's talk about those spots.
Need help with your NFL picks? Get NFL insider knowledge from Pro Football Doc, Dr. David Chow, with Sick Picks at Sports Injury Central. We reveal hidden injury advantages the sports books miss. Our doctors provide insights, and our algorithm tells you who to bet on. Spreads, player props, totals, in-game bets, Sick Picks covers it all. Get a free week now with promo code SportsGrid at SickScore.com.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern.
Somebody's going to get paid. There's 5 spots left in the NFL to have your dream come true and be an NFL coach. That's the Cowboys. That's the Jaguars. That's the Jets, Raiders, and the Saints. So, Joe Ranieri, let's go through these teams here because we're going to start simply here. I want to ask you, if you were a head coach and all 5 spots that were open offered you a job, Cowboys, Jaguars, Jets, Raiders, and Saints, which team are you choosing first to go to?
I mean, as crazy as it is, the Raiders are the most intriguing just because they are going to have more cap room, more draft capital. There's no GM there yet, but it's already been decided that whoever they end up hiring is going to have a lot of say in the personnel and where they go from here. So, they are sitting pretty good with that, cap space, draft capital, and an influence over personnel decisions. And there's no general manager there yet. So call me crazy. Yeah, I think if you're looking long-term to build something and really put your stamp on it, I think you have the best chance with the Raiders. We know Woody Johnson's a few fries short of a happy meal. Who wants to work for the Cowboys and Jerry? The Jags, nobody wants to work for Trent Baalke already. We know this. And the Saints, they got a lot of other issues here. So I think the Raiders is the most appealing job from a long-term basis where we're looking to build something here and you've got all the cards and all the assets available to you. I think the Raiders is the best job that's left.
From a living perspective, I would agree with you with the Raiders. Maybe a little, couple $1 million house in Henderson, little Lake Las Vegas. You got the Strip out there, wonderful restaurants, world-class entertainment all the way through. But that division itself scares me to death if I'm going to take the Raiders job with the coaches and the quarterbacks I'm going to have to tangle with on a year-to-year basis. So when I look up and down the schedule and say, where would I like to go? They're not great spot. And the reason being is it's not as if like the Super Bowl champion wins. Like Kansas say, hey, you know what? Andy Reid's retiring. Like, man, I get Mahomes. I get this organization. Let me slide in. Like there are issues all the way across the board. I actually would like the Jaguars spot for me, just for the simple fact is I think that division I can compete in over the next 5 to 6 years. I already have what I think is my franchise quarterback, money to spend, an owner willing to spend. But at the same time, it is Jacksonville. Things haven't worked out all that well. They've hired bad general managers, as we talk about in Baalke, who sometimes keep staying there. You've made decisions on, hey, I think Urban Meyer's best for my franchise, which means who is making those decisions that's going to make the decision that's going to supposedly help me take the Jaguars to the Super Bowl. But if we are looking now for you as the worst place to go between the Cowboys, Jaguars, Jets, Raiders, and Saints, where are you not going to, Joe?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to the Cowboys. Sorry, just not happening. I'm not working for Jerry. Jerry is obviously, if I'm looking at it, you basically set Mike McCarthy up to fail by doing absolutely nothing in the offseason last year and then not renewing or renegotiating his contract and having him walk into a season as basically a lame duck coach. So I just think that you're going to have to be great to be the Cowboys, but the I have to win now mentality of the Cowboys, and every time you don't, I'm sorry, man. It's either what have you done for me lately or you're out. I think there's a few other jobs where you'll be given a lot of rope and a lot of opportunities to be able to build something like Dan Campbell did in Detroit, for instance. And bring in a culture and bring in a winning mentality and bring in the right guys. You're never going to have that kind of say in Dallas, and that's the problem.
Yeah, you're right about that because the issue with the Dallas spot is not actually that you won't get paid a lot of money because you will. It's not that you're going to live in a fantastic area because the Dallas Metroplex is absolutely tremendous, but it's the fact that you might be sitting there on a Friday with your game plan, and old Jarrett comes down and goes, I want you to get Ezekiel Elliott a couple carries in this game down by the goal line. Like, okay, boss, thanks for that. And there goes my game plan for this weekend. But if we are looking at spots that just are tough, like the New York Jets are like the poster child for crazy foundational structural issues that you have. And they date way back. This just doesn't start in like, hey, Rex Ryan had a couple good years there. This goes back a long time where this team just doesn't make the playoffs. And I always go back to Hard Knocks. This is probably, a decade and a half ago, where Darrelle Revis was the best football player in the NFL and just so happened to play for the Jets at the cornerback position. And they haggled and haggled and haggled instead of getting that done because Woody Johnson just said, I'm not paying you this money and I'm going to make a point to make my football team worse by doing that. Good luck coaching the Jets. More NFL topics next, right here on the Early Line.
they have a lot of hopes, and they thought last year they were turning the corner. Even early this year, they start turning the corner, and then you lose 13 games in a row.
Edmonton chipped away, got a late goal, won the game 4-3. I felt like they dominated the third period. They moved the puck on that power play. It was an exceptional hockey game. It went over the total.
Only on SportsGrid.
The two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results. What? How do you do this one? Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
It's never too early to look at the Super Bowl. Boots will be on the ground, the SportsGrid Network, live in New Orleans for an exciting week. The question is, we don't know who's actually going to be playing that week until AFC, NFC Championship weekend is completed, which is this Sunday, and I can't wait for it. And this morning, just looking at my wall here, I have a couple jerseys in the studio here that I like to glance up and look at, players that have won me money, great football players that I adore, and side by side, Joe, in my office, I have Josh Allen and I have Jalen Hurts. So before we get to the look ahead lines and how they might lay out, let me ask you this question. From a fan perspective, who do you want to see line up in the Super Bowl as the matchup?
Well, I don't think you can go wrong with either the Bills or Kansas City because both bring extraordinary narratives to the field. So if it's Kansas City, they're going to be looking to do something historic in the NFL and have the three-peat, right? With Patrick Mahomes and company, and that'll be a dominating storyline. If it is Buffalo, then finally Josh Allen is, the Peyton Manning finally getting past Tom Brady kind of situation here at Mahomes. Can he finally get there? And then on the other side, Jaden Daniels doing something that we've never seen any rookie quarterback do. Could he carry this team to a Super Bowl title? That would be phenomenal. And then, of course, Philadelphia, no shortage of narratives there as well. And you know this, Donnie, the Saquon Barkley. Could it be a dominant running back, not a quarterback, a dominant running back can win you a Super Bowl title? And this is what the Giants originally thought when they drafted him. Correct me if I'm wrong here, that was why they drafted him as high as they drafted him, because they believed he was that kind of player. Can that finally come to fruition in Philadelphia, and you can win a Super Bowl on a running back with a running back more than anything else? So I think the Final Four here provide fantastic narratives and interest no matter who ends up advancing.
Now, we'll get into the spreads and the hypotheticals in just a moment here and analyze those. But I always like to say this because the NFL is a business show. Who does the NFL want to show up in this Super Bowl, which is the bigger question?
Yeah, well, they want Mahomes and company to go in and do something that's never been. Absolutely, they would. But I think they'd be just as happy with Buffalo getting back with Josh Allen finally being. I mean, having Mahomes and Allen battle every year from here on out is never I think, a bad thing for the NFL. And I think if they can get a rookie quarterback to take his team and lead him to a Super Bowl with Washington, does it get any better than that, Donnie? I mean, we're talking historic on so many different levels, what this kid and this organization, and let's face it, the NFL would love to stick it to the former owner of the Washington Commanders, would they not? See what happens? We get you out of the league, and look what happens to your team. So, yeah, there's, I think, a little bit of pride there with the NFL if they could get the Commanders in also.
You're right about the Commanders. And kids today, as I like to say, don't understand how impactful that Washington franchise was over the last 50 to 60 years. When Daniel Snyder took over, FedEx Field, Jack Kent Cooke Stadium, what it was called at the beginning of it, they had the longest season ticket waiting list in the NFL by a wide margin. By the time Daniel Snyder sold the team, they couldn't even sell their games out or basically fill that half full with their own fans at this point. So finally buying back in, you're right. The ultimate dagger for him would be like, wow, as soon as I get out, they just make good hires and good draft picks, and away they go and win Super Bowls. That's something to watch out for. But if we do look at the hypotheticals, and first starting with the Eagles making it to the Super Bowl, 1.5 and 1.5, both of those plus money, whether it's the Bills or the Chiefs. So let's go there. Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, Eagles. Do you agree with the hypotheticals that in both of those scenarios, the Eagles will be the underdogs in the Super Bowl?
Well, I think yes, because the Chiefs or the Bills will have the best quarterback on the field, and that matters. And no disrespect to Jalen Hurts, but Jalen Hurts is not in that same breath as Josh Allen and Mahomes. So I do agree that the AFC, whoever it's going to be, is likely going to be the favorite simply because of those two guys, right? I mean, if Josh Allen wins the MVP this year, which, he probably will, you got Mahomes already, and not taking anything away from Jalen Hurts, but let's be realistic here. It's just not in that same category just yet. And I do think the Commanders will be interesting because I think that number might even be a little lower. I think if it's the Chiefs Commanders or even Bills Commanders, that thing will get much closer to 5.5, 6 than it will 3.5 or 4.
It'll be interesting to see, too, because, the Eagles and the Chiefs had played before, but so many times where when you enter into a championship spot, like I'm an Eagles fan, in 2017, it's like, boy, for us to win our first Super Bowl, we actually got to beat Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. I mean, like, my goodness here.
Yeah.
So having said that, like, the Eagles have one, but the Eagles lining up against the Chiefs, you got to be saying, we were just here with a double-digit lead, and it's Patrick Mahomes and it's Andy Reid, and they beat us. Like, they know how to win championships. They're gunning for the third straight. They know how to do it. Whereas the Buffalo Bills get there, and I'm not knocking the Bills, but if the Bills win, which they did this past weekend in a titanic matchup against the Ravens, then vanquish their playoff enemies in Kansas City, I'm not saying, but I'm saying like, hey, we finally got back to the promised land at this point. And my goodness, it's been a long time. It's been, 30, 40 years since the early 90s, since we actually got into the Super Bowl, that they're happy with that. But if I'm an Eagles fan, I'm actually leaning towards hopefully playing the Buffalo Bills, even though, Joe, I actually think the Bills are a more talented team overall with a more explosive quarterback. And that's crazy talking about Patrick Mahomes. But we understand so many years of watching, they just win Kansas City. They're not going to fracture if they're down 14-3 in the first quarter. They're not going to be like, oh, my goodness, the lights are too bright at this point. So for me, and also from an intrigue standpoint, I would love the Bills to get there. Because, Joe, we've been around the block multiple times here. We just got through the Patriots dynasty. It was like, we're just doing content. We got to talk about Tom Brady and the Patriots again and Bill Belichick. My goodness. Every year we talk about Kansas City. So I think it would be refreshing if the Bills got there, a new fan base in there, a new hit couple talking points. Josh Allen is fun to root for. That would be interesting. But let's flip it over to the opposite side and talk if the Commanders make the Super Bowl. Interesting enough, if the Eagles are in there, it's plus 1.5, and it's plus 1.5 depending on who they're playing. The Commanders, same thing, plus 4.5 and plus 4.5. Bills, Commanders, Chiefs, Commanders. Me, as I said again, being a big-time Eagles fan, it would break my heart. But I got to tell you, it would be intriguing if a rookie quarterback of the Commanders is in the Super Bowl. Woo.
Yeah, well, think about it, right? So Jaden Daniels versus Patrick Mahomes. The old school, new school, the same old, or the rookie and building a new dynasty there in Washington. It is fascinating, whoever it is that's going to advance. But I also agree that the AFC should be the favorite because either way, you're talking about two of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the league. They are always going to be looked at in a favorable light, certainly in the market. And experience matters there, too, because if Mahomes ends up making it, whether it's the Eagles or whether it's Washington, they're always going to have the market support there. And in likelihood, that number would rise as well. So I think the Eagles, a lot is going to depend on how the Eagles look against this Commanders and Jaden Daniel team. And that line might move differently no matter who it is that they're playing, depending on how they look this week.
No doubt about it. If you're looking at the FanDuel Sportsbook right now, and the odds to win the Super Bowl, it's the Philadelphia Eagles at a plus 180 price as the favorites, the Chiefs and the Bills, followed by the Commanders. You might say, like, wait a second. Doesn't make sense. How the Eagles underdogs in the Super Bowl favorites to win it. Understand the Eagles' path to victory. Technically easier to go through Washington than the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs squaring off with a minus 1.5 to plus 1.5 spread here. It makes sense. It does. Let's make sense of the national championship. Mike Blewett joins the show next. Boots on the ground, people.
They have a lot of hopes, and they thought last year they were turning the corner. Even early this year, they start turning the corner, and then you lose 13 games in a row.
Edmonton chipped away, got a late goal, won the game 4-3. I felt like they dominated the third period. They moved the puck on that power play. It was an exceptional hockey game. It went over the total.
Only on SportsGrid.
This guy Ovechkin, how he was injured and missed all that time, and the fact that he's still on pace to pass Gretzky.
I think everybody's rooting for Ovechkin at this point in time, and I think he'll do it as well. So it's a feat that no one ever thought Scotty would be broken. It's going to be broken, and it's probably going to be broken because he's not going to stop shooting.
Pharrell, coast to coast, only on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results. What? How do you do this one? Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Hour number 2 in full effect. A lot of great topics. We've been talking about NFL, college football, but it's time to really focus on what happened last night, and we need some expertise with boots on the ground. Donnie Rightside, Joe Ramirez, we welcome in Mike Blewett. He's ready to go. He looks dapper. He's in a great location. He's in an approved location. How are we feeling this morning, Mike?
I feel great. We have obviously had an entertaining game last night. Ohio State took care of business in an impressive manner. But I'm glad that Notre Dame fought back and made something out of the the end of the third and fourth quarter. Impressive performance by Ohio State. I thought they were the best team in the country for really the entire season. I thought they were potentially the best team to win this bracket, and they ended up doing it. So shout out to Will Howard, who had a huge game, completed his first 12 passes. OSU converted their first 7 third downs. So they just got off to a great start offensively. And despite Notre Dame's huge 9-minute and 45-second, 18-play touchdown drive, Ohio State bounced right back.
Mike, let's get to the start of the event here, because Atlanta just seems like the heartbeat of America when it comes to college football, the heart of SEC territory, no stranger to having big football games. You were there last night. Give me a vibe of the crowd. Ohio State on one side, Notre Dame on the other. Who dominated the crowd? What were the vibes before the game, and how did Atlanta handle the national championship?
So a couple of things. I don't want to be critical of it because it was a great event, but it's right in the shadow of the College Football Hall of Fame, so that's a good thing. Unfortunately, the weather did impact the pregame festivities. It is freezing here. It's not unlike weather that you would normally get in Atlanta. It's as cold here as it is in New York right now. Real field temperatures in the single digits. So there was no outside tailgates other than a few heated tents. And I think that robbed a little bit of the pregame vibe around the stadium. However, that did force people inside. So the stadium was completely full at kickoff. I think you would expect that either way. But the fans were all in there enjoying the Ohio State band, the Notre Dame band before the game. And I will say, relative to the crowds, you might think that Ohio State would dominate. But Notre Dame had a very strong crowd. If it was tipped one way or the other, it was maybe 60-40 Ohio State, excuse me, but really a good, strong crowd for Notre Dame. And the vibes were really good after that long, sustained touchdown drive to open the game.
How did it look there, Mike? Because on TV, it looked like, listen, Notre Dame, very physical team. They kind of bulldozed their way through teams to get to this point. But man, oh man, did it look like Ohio State and their playmakers just had another gear. It looked like the speed of Ohio State was Notre Dame's just not there. They didn't have those kinds of playmakers, which is why coming back from a 3-score deficit was never really in the cards for them. But the speed looked like that was the big difference between these two teams last night.
No doubt. And Notre Dame could get stops on third down. Like I said, Ohio State had their first 7 third downs. They were great on third down. And look, pregame, I talked about this here on the grid. I thought that Notre Dame was going to have to, similar to Texas, force Will Howard to make plays. Jeremiah Smith, Henderson, Judkins, all of those guys, to your point, Joe, have so much speed and talent that if you allow them to make plays, they're going to beat you. You have to force Will Howard to throw into tight windows and force him into third and longs. And even when they did that, he came up big. I thought Will Howard was fantastic last night. He answered every time he was asked to answer a question about his talent or what he could do. He did it last night. So I thought he was really the MVP of the game last night. I thought he was brilliant. 6 plus. So one thing I wanted to talk about and to veer off of that question, Joe, is I never in my life, Donnie and Joe, have I been to a sporting event that was more impacted by media than last night. Notre Dame goes out, has that 9-minute and 45-second touchdown drive. So there's no commercial breaks.
Yeah.
Then Ohio State comes back and their drive went over 6 minutes. So they took the rest of the first quarter on 2 long sustained drives.
Yep.
And the breaks in venue for commercial time were interminable. Riley Leonard at one point didn't throw a pass for over 20 minutes. And it wasn't because Notre Dame was choosing to run. It was because we were in commercial breaks. So you talk about the vibes, they were fantastic pre-game and during that opening Notre Dame drive. But it dissipated throughout the first quarter because of these long commercial breaks. Never in my life have I complained about that, and I thought it had an impact. I was texting with people that said that it doesn't seem like it's all that raucous there, and it was, but there were so many breaks in the action. People were just sitting on their hands for 10 minutes at a time.
Yep. Completely agree with that. If we do look at the coronation of the season, which was a national championship for Ohio State, let's talk about Ryan Day and the Ohio State season that they had with 14 wins, which is incredible. They played 16 total games, but coming off of that Michigan loss, the doubters, could he be fired just after that football game with that embarrassing loss to rally the troops for Ohio State and win a national championship? What did you see out of Ryan Day and Ohio State in the season in totality?
I thought, look, the only mistakes that they made were at the end of the Oregon game. They mismanaged the clock. And I thought Michigan, I think they had a chip on their shoulder about being called not physical. And they tried to prove a point against Michigan, and it was the wrong thing. They should have played like they played last night, getting the ball out quickly into the hands of Smith and Judkins and Henderson and whomever else was willing to make plays. They should have beaten Michigan by 3 touchdowns, and they were too proud about their people calling them soft.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That was a major, major loss that they had, which turned around winning a national championship, which just a few short years ago, you lose to Michigan the final game of the season, you don't even make the playoffs. Now with the expanded playoff, they made the playoffs, they made the best of the playoffs, and they certainly have now pulled down a national championship for Ohio State fans out there. But we have a monster Sunday of football to get to next. Mike Lewis is going to help us out with it. We'll be right back.
You know, they have a lot of hopes, and they thought last year they were turning the corner. Even early this year, they start turning the corner, and then you lose 13 games in a row.
Edmonton chipped away, got a late goal, won the game 4-3. I felt like they dominated the third period. They moved the puck on that power play. It was an exceptional hockey game. It went over the total.
Only on SportsGrid.
This guy Ovechkin, how he was injured and missed all that time, and the fact that he's still on pace to pass Gretzky.
I think everybody's rooting for Ovechkin at this point in time, and I think he'll do it as well. So it's a feat that no one ever thought Scotty would be broken. It's going to be broken, and it's probably going to be broken because he's not going to stop shooting.
Pharrell, coast to coast, only on SportsGrid.
The two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results. What? How do you do this one? Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
From one championship game to multiple championship games this weekend, the AFC championship game and the NFC championship game. I'm Donnie Rightside. He's Joe Ranieri, once again joined by Mike Blewett to talk some NFL action, and we'll get to the second game of the day. It's the Buffalo Bills and it's the Kansas City Chiefs. 6:30 p.m. kickoff out at Arrowhead. You take a look at Mahomes at the FanDuel Sportsbook, a 1.5-point favorite. Shows a lot of respect for those Buffalo Bills, and a total that opened up at 47.5 and still sits at 47.5 today. When you saw the opening numbers here, Mike, for this game, what were your first thoughts?
I think it makes sense. Maybe you could get a little bit more respect for the Chiefs being at home, but they were never going to make it more than a field goal. So this settled in right about where I thought it would. If you're a Chiefs backer, I wouldn't mess with the points. They've shown their ability to win close games. I would just take the money line at -126 versus -114 or -110. I think you don't worry about that juice at all. I do think a couple of things, and I've been a robot on the Chiefs really for the last 3 months, is that I still think that Patrick Mahomes' presence and the fact that he isn't playing at his elite statistical level distracts people from how good the Chiefs' defense is. And obviously the Bills are coming off a game in which they didn't do a lot offensively. I'm concerned about their lack of explosiveness offensively outside of anybody named Josh Allen. So Khalil Shakir had a good game. He is at times their biggest playmaker, and I just think that's an issue for them going up against the Chiefs, who still have Travis Kelce that can play at an elite level. So I think I absolutely give both defenses respect. The last the three meetings that they've had in the playoffs have all been overs, or at least over this 47.5 number. But I would be inclined to bet the under on this one, as I think both defenses have been excellent this season and still don't get the requisite respect that they deserve.
It's kind of crazy, Mike, because we're looking at two teams that I think we can all agree are not as good as we've seen their teams in the past. Buffalo, we just keep hearing they're not as good. They don't have the weapons that they've had in the past. They're not maybe as big on defense, and yet Mahomes and his offense is not what it was. Like, okay, but yet here they are, Mike. These two teams that aren't as good as they've been in the past are getting ready to battle for a trip to the Super Bowl. And the big question is, can Buffalo finally break through at Mahomes, or is he just going to win every one of these? At some point, you can't keep winning one-score games, right? At some point, there's got to be regression. Is this the time it comes?
It certainly could. I think the Bills are good enough to beat them. I don't think this is a blowout, and the Chiefs haven't really been blowing teams out other than the Steelers on Christmas Day. So Josh Allen is going to have to be perfect in the way that he has been recently, not turning the ball over. I don't think you get the blow-up Josh Allen game that you've gotten in years past where he turns the ball over recklessly. In fact, the other day, I thought that play down near the goal line where he was wrapped up and thought about pitching the ball back to James Cook, he didn't do it, which is maybe the biggest piece of evolution in his career. He was really good in making sure he kept that ball tucked in tight. So they'll have to play clean. I think that this Kansas City defense, again, the presence of Mahomes distracts people from how good this defense is. And I think that George Karlaftis with 3 sacks and Chris Jones and Amenahu were awesome the other day against the Texans. And I think they could be again. So I'm leaning towards the Chiefs. I don't think 1.5 is enough, but like I said, money line it and be happy on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening.
Expectations, we were supposed to get the Kansas City Chiefs versus either the Ravens or the Bills entering into the playoffs. Not the same thing in the NFC. We expected the Eagles and Detroit to be in this game. It's the Eagles and the Commanders. Now up to 6.5 as a favorite. Live this morning on the FanDuel Sportsbook and 47.5. Quick thoughts on that one, Mike.
Yeah, so I heard you guys talking earlier. This is one of the most brilliant rookie campaigns in NFL history. If he wins this, it will be the most brilliant rookie campaign in NFL history. So I don't know that there's a team that's gone 14-1 in their last 15 games that people dislike as much as this Philadelphia Eagles team. It's really amazing. It's amazing. And I think
we
they're
all
going to
love
win.
the Eagles. SportsGrid loves the Eagles. They're going to win this weekend. Mike Lewis said it. At least I think he just said it there. We'll talk Fade the Public next. Thanks, Mike, for joining us on the show. We'll be right back.